All right, listen up, you goofy-eyed rizzless theologians. We're talking about the big man, St. Augustine of Hippo. He was out here in 354 AD cooking up Christian philosophy like it was a 2 a.m. shift at Waffle House. He took Platonism, remixed it with a little Christianity, and dropped the hardest gospel track of the medieval era. It's like if Plato or Socrates and Jesus had a child. So join me as we dive into St. Augustine's philosophy, timestamps below in the description as always, and enjoy. Faith precedes understanding, credo ut intelligam. Part A, the role of faith as a foundation for knowledge. So our boy Augie, yeah, we're calling him that for now, basically said human knowledge is mid. You're not getting the real lore of existence unless you start with faith. He respected reason. He wasn't out here saying thinking is cringe, but he did think that reason alone was like trying to win a Warzone match without a squad. Possible, sure. Stupidly difficult, absolutely. His famous line, credo ut intelligam, I believe so that I may understand, was the 4th century version of, bro, just trust me. And honestly, that's not as wild as it sounds. Like when you were a kid, you didn't reason your way into knowing Santa was fake. Some older cousin just hit you with it. Yeah, bro, Santa isn't real, you fucking dipshit. And you trusted them. Same thing with knowledge. You gotta start by believing something before you can go galaxy brain on it. So why does faith come first, according to Augustine? The first thing he mentions is that trust is kind of like a learning cheat code. If you're a kid in math class telling your teacher, yo, teach, you say some cool things, but I don't believe in this multiplication shiz. Guess what? That kid's gonna fail real fast. Augie said the same applies to faith. Before you can understand the deep truths about God, existence, universe, you gotta trust the source first. The second thing is that testimony is always the greatest thing that exists. Most of what we know comes from trusting someone else. Some people have never been to Mongolia. You probably have never been to Mongolia. But you believe it exists because maps and people say so. Augustine said the same thing with theology. You'll trust Wikipedia, but you won't trust divine revelation? That's fucking insane. The third thing is that humans are invariably running low IQ mode. I mean by this that Augustine thought human reason was kind of like a demo version of understanding. You get a little bit of a taste, but the full game, or the ultimate truth, is locked behind some faith-based DLC. Without divine guidance, you're basically just a monkey trying to put shapes into holes, getting lucky every once in a while, but not understanding why you are getting it right or wrong. Unlike modern skeptics who want to solo queue life with pure logic, Augustine thought faith was a necessary co-op partner. Augustine wanted to push back on these academic skeptics, which are the 4th century equivalent of dudes who say, well, actually, nothing can be known for sure at parties, and then wonder why they're not invited back. These skeptics said, we can't trust our senses or our reasoning, so we can't know anything for certain. And Augustine was like, all right, shut up for a second, I got you. Clap back with some bars. Augustine first dropped the you can't doubt that you exist move. He hit him with the si falor sum, if I am mistaken, I exist, which is the medieval equivalent of I think, therefore I am, which Descartes would later famously be credited for. The skeptics were saying, what if everything is a lie? And Augustine was like, bro, even if you're wrong, you have to exist to be wrong. Checkmate. The second argument is that God is the ultimate study guide. Augustine knew humans kind of sucked at figuring out deep truths on their own, so he argued that God beams truth directly into your brain, like some divine pager. Think of it like a moral airdrop. You don't learn that murder is bad. You kind of just recognize that it's bad because divine illumination gives you access to those eternal truths. And the last pushback to skepticism that he made was that the skeptics be contradicting themselves. The academic skeptics were running around saying, nothing can be known for sure. And Augustine was like, you sound pretty sure of that, my guy. It's like someone saying, I never make absolute statements. Augustine just pointed out that their whole philosophy collapses under its own weight, like a bad Jenga tower. So at the end of the day, Augustine believed that faith keeps us from spiraling into existential doom scrolling and actually gives us something solid to stand on. If you're still skeptical, just remember, Augustine would probably say, it's okay, God believes in you even if you don't believe in him, which is either comforting or the ultimate theological Uno reverse card. Augustine wanted to prove that we already live by faith. According to Augustine, belief always comes before understanding. Y'all are already doing it, you just don't realize it. He made a couple of different arguments for this, but he used the first example, kids. Little kids just trust their parents before they even understand why. A toddler doesn't sit down and run a cost-benefit analysis on why they shouldn't lick an electric socket or eat a Tide Pod. They just believe that their mom knows what she's talking about when she says don't do that. When they grow up, or after they've gotten zapped and poisoned a couple of times, they actually understand why. The second point is that science is kind of actually similar to faith. Even science, which is the most logical skeptical field, runs on belief. A physics student doesn't roll into class and say, nah, I'm not believing in gravity today until I personally test it. They take Newton's word for it, and then they go do the math and experiments. And lastly, friendship is actually kind of emotional faith. If you ever had a friend give you life advice, and at first you're like, nah bro, you don't get it. But then months later, think about that conversation again and realize, damn, they're actually right. That's exactly what Augustine's talking about. You gotta trust people before you fully understand their reasoning. And for him, our relationship with God works the exact same way. Faith and divine wisdom leads to deeper understanding over time. So faith isn't just some weird religious thing. It's literally how Augustine thought we function as human beings. We believe first, and then understanding comes later. Augustine proposed two kinds of knowledge, because he wasn't out here saying ditch reason, just believe. Instead, he saw faith as a necessary foundation, and reason was a tool that builds on faith. So he divided this into two things. Scientia, which is the stuff we can figure out ourselves. This is the earthly measurable knowledge, logic, math, science, things you can prove by looking out at the world, making experience. And it must be combined with sapientia, which is higher knowledge. It's the big questions. Why are we here? What is good and evil? Is there an afterlife? Augustine said you can't solve those with a calculator. This kind of truth about God, the soul, morality, it needs divine revelation. You can't just logic your way to enlightenment. Faith gets you into the maze, and reason helps you navigate once you're inside. But reason alone can never get you into the maze in the first place. Faith and reason in the search for God. It's important to stress that Augustine wasn't anti-reason. Far from it. He pulled heavy influences from Plato and Plotinus, using logic to show why God must exist. But he also knew that human reason was faulty, kind of like an old GPS. It can get you part of the way there, but without divine revelation and illumination, you're going to end up lost in the woods. He outlined three major arguments for the proof of God: the eternal truths argument, the argument from beauty and order, and the argument from contingency. So let's just unpack these really quickly. The first argument, the eternal truths argument, can be looked at like some truths just are. If you think about concepts like 2 + 2 = 4 and that justice is good, Augustine saw those things and went, well, if these things are always true no matter what, then clearly truths like these need a home. Since these truths don't change, they can't be a part of the material world that undergoes transition, death, decay, and change, because everything here is not stagnant. If you're not based on human opinion and not floating around in space, where could they be? Plato had the idea of the world of forms. Augustine took that concept and said they exist in the mind of God. Augustine's reasoning is that if eternal, unchanging truths exist, they must be grounded in something internal and unchanging, aka God. So even if you're just vibing with logic and not big on faith, your own ability to recognize universal truths is already pointing you in God's direction. Augustine's second argument was basically looking at the world and going, bro, this place is way too well put to be random. The argument from beauty and order is asking us to take a step back and look at nature, music, and the way everything just works out. And Augustine thought there's no way this was all an accident. Someone had to design this masterpiece. The universe can be seen as God's art gallery. The laws of physics, the symmetry of a snowflake, the Fibonacci sequence in nature, it all screams intentional design. Augustine wasn't buying the idea that this all just happened. He saw it as a proof of a rational, divine creator. If you walk into a room and see a perfectly painted Mona Lisa, you don't think, I guess I just, came into existence somehow. The same logic applies here. Augustine also thought that beauty was a clue to something greater. If you ever heard a song so good it puts you in your feels, make you feel something deep in your soul, Augustine thought our appreciation for beauty, whether in music, nature, or even a well-formed argument, if you're a nerd, wasn't just random preference. Instead, he saw it as a built-in longing for divine perfection. Every time you admire a sunset or a vibe to a great song, you're unknowingly craving a connection to God, the ultimate source of beauty. So Augustine thought there would still be doubters, so he explained that everything around us is just borrowing existence from something else, and if you keep following that strand of logic, you hit a dead end, unless there's some ultimate self-sufficient being. This is his argument from contingency. So, contingency. The world is basically one giant web of dependencies. Look around, nothing is just by itself. A tree needs sunlight, water, and soil. You need your parents to exist. Even planets are just chilling in space because of gravity. Augustine saw that literally everything depends on something else to exist, which makes them contingent beings, things that don't have to exist, but do because of other causes. The problem, however, is that infinite dependency is a logical nightmare. If everything is contingent, you'd have an infinite chain of things relying on something else forever. But infinite regress doesn't make sense. You can't just have an endless stack of dominoes without a first one to tip over the rest. So logically, something must exist that isn't contingent. Something just is, with no need for anything else to keep it going. Augustine believed that God is the only one who doesn't need an explanation. Augustine concluded that the only thing that could fit the description is God, the necessary being that exists by its very nature. Unlike everything else, God isn't caused or dependent on anything. He is the uncaused cause, the foundation that holds up reality itself. So Augustine's book on the free choice of the will is basically him and his buddy St. Evodius sitting around riffing on why bad stuff happens if God is supposed to be the GOAT. It's kind of like Socrates' dialogues, except instead of some ancient Athenian dude getting roasted, it's Evodius taking L's for like 3 whole books. The big question, if God is all powerful and all good, why does evil even exist? If he can't stop it, he's weak. If he made it, he's a little sus. Evodius is a real curious cat. He asked Augustine, if God made everything, did he make evil too? And Augustine, probably sipping a goblet of Hennessy, hits him with, nah fam, evil's not a thing. It's just what happens when good gets corrupted. What? Like milk going bad, and yeah, bad milk is evil. But you don't blame cows for it. Some people thought the universe was a battleground between good and evil, like a cosmic Marvel movie. Augustine shut that down real quick. He argued that everything God creates is good and must be good, because how could an all-good being produce something truly bad? Being all-powerful and having a limitation is a contradiction that Augustine could not accept. So evil isn't a rival force. It's actually more of a deficiency, like how blindness isn't a lack of sight, not a separate active thing. He then says there are 3 flavors of evil, but 2 we actually care about. The first one is moral evil. That's on us. Lying, cheating, stealing, doing goofy stuff for clout, classic human behavior. A corruption of human free will, which was meant for good and is good. The second evil is natural evil. These are earthquakes, diseases, getting spawn killed in a Call of Duty match. I'm kidding, it's not actually that. But it's not directly our fault, but part of the divine justice package. By defining evil like this, Augustine cleared God of any wrongdoing. He didn't create evil, it was just a result when something good is missing. Third type of evil, which we won't go into too much detail, is metaphysical evil, which is really just the fact that compared to God, we're like low-resolution PNGs while he's running in 4K. But if free will causes moral evil, why do we even need it? Wouldn't it be better just to, be NPCs? So Evodius, not ready to quit, asks Augustine if free will is actually good since it lets us do bad stuff. Augustine, full of confidence, says free will is a gift from God, baby, like PlayStation 5. If you use it for evil, that's a you problem. Augustine says free will isn't the problem. It's that people misuse it to chase lower tier goods instead of higher tier ones, like choosing fast food over home-cooked meal, but on a cosmic divine scale. Take, for example, your hands. God created them, and they are good. But if you use a gun with your hands to kill people, you're not being good. You're turning away from what your hands could do, like draw a painting, praise God, do charitable acts of kindness, and you're choosing to use them as a tool to allow you to do evil. But if God knows you're going to mess up, is it still your fault? Evodius is a little bit confused, and he asks the classic, if God knows what we're going to do we actually have free will even? Augustine, now probably getting tired of this dude, says, look buddy, just because God knows what will happen doesn't mean he's making it happen. If you're in a Minecraft server, go invisible, you could spectate someone stealing or PvPing, despite it being banned on the server. You don't change anything by knowing about it. The question then, that is broad, is why did God give us free will? Let's imagine a world where everyone had to be good. No choice in the matter. Sounds peaceful, but also meaningless. Augustine argued that true goodness must be chosen, not programmed. Free will allows people to seek God, develop virtue, and take moral responsibility. But with that freedom comes the risk of choosing evil. The real problem is that we misuse free will. Free will isn't evil. The issue is the distortion that occurs. Augustine links it to the fall of Adam and Eve, when they were created good, but chose to disobey, introducing moral corruption into human nature. Evil isn't God's doing. It's what happens when people turn away from him. Very easy. But why wouldn't God just make us choose good? Some argue that God should have designed a world where people always freely choose good. Augustine disagreed. Forced goodness isn't real goodness. If people were programmed to only do good, virtue would be meaningless. A world with free will is better than one without, even if it's a result in someone choosing evil. God can bring good out of evil, for example, moral growth, redemption, and deeper faith. In short, free will makes both love and sin possible, and Augustine believed that the trade-off was worth it. Beyond the evil caused by human choice, what about natural evils, things like disease, disasters, and death? Augustine argued that while reason can analyze suffering, only faith can make sense of it within God's larger plan. So let's break it down. We often ask why suffering happens, but to Augustine, that was a stupid question. Our limited human perspectives prevents us from seeing how suffering fits into a greater purpose. Maybe you lost your job and something shitty happened to you. But faith is needed to trust that God's wisdom and justice extend beyond what we can comprehend and understand. This becomes divine providence, and suffering is part of God's greater plan. Augustine pointed to stories like Joseph, who was sold into slavery, but later saved Egypt from a famine, and Job, who lost everything, but was ultimately had it restored. These examples suggest that suffering, while painful, can lead to a greater good, even if we don't immediately see them. God doesn't create suffering, but He allows it as a part of a larger, often unseen purpose. And this leads us to the bigger picture, eternal justice and redemption. Augustine believed this life isn't the final reality. Ultimate justice comes in the afterlife. Those who suffer unjustly will receive divine reward, while evildoers will face divine judgment. Faith reassures believers that even when reason fails to provide answers, God's justice will ultimately prevail. For Augustine, natural evil isn't a flaw in God's creation. It's part of a larger divine order that humans must accept through faith. If you like this video, please give me a like, comment, subscribe. Much obliged. Still early in my infancy in this channel. Have a suggestion for a philosopher you want to be reviewed? I might cover it. This is a loose plan. Might pivot to more serious videos, might not. Well, anyways, catch you on the flip side.